You are watching the deliberate and systematic violation of civil rights. This video was taped on Saturday, June 10, 1989, between 7:30 a.m. and 1:30 p.m. at the Los Angeles Midland Clinic. On that day, these American citizens had their civil rights violated as they followed the teachings of their Christian faith and peacefully sat in front of an abortion clinic to save preborn children from being killed. These rescuers are literally saving lives. Operation Rescue has confirmation that 259 babies have been saved through rescues. In the past 14 months, over 28,000 rescuers have been arrested without one single act of violence on the part of a rescuer. Rescuers are totally non-violent. Their only resistance is to go limp when arrested. They do this because they know that to voluntarily walk away is to allow the killing of the unborn babies to begin. Arresting officers were from the LAPD Metro Division. This is the same division whose officers brutally arrested approximately 800 peaceful rescuers on March 25, 1989. At those earlier arrests, the police inflicted many injuries. They included 3 broken arms, a broken foot, and numerous abrasions, sprains, and contusions. One woman was fondled by a police officer once she was brought onto the bus. The LAPD denied incarcerated rescuers access to their lawyers for over 56 hours. Many were denied prescription medications, and all were denied pastoral visits on Easter Sunday. Rosaries and Bibles were taken away as well. At that earlier rescue on March 25th, the police encountered no active resistance from rescuers. They also knew that on June 10th, they would be arresting passive, nonviolent people. But for some reason, they introduced a new pain compliance tactic. For the first time in Los Angeles, the police used a martial arts weapon known as nunchucks to apply excruciating pain to rescuers. Wrists and arms were willfully crushed. One rescuer's arm was broken, and dozens suffered compression injuries. Nunchucks are dangerous offensive weapons, which are illegal in California. It is a felony for a citizen to even possess one. Formed by 2 handles connected by a chain or cord, the nunchucks were wrapped around arms or wrists and tightened like a vice to cause the excruciating pain. Documented injuries caused by the use of nunchucks on June 10th included hairline wrist fractures, numerous cases of crushed or torn ligaments, tendons, nerves, and blood vessels, severe swelling, severe bruising, abrasions, pressure burns, and this man's severely fractured arm. Even the rescuers who voluntarily walked to the police bus were not spared punishment. They too were subjected to plastic handcuffs which were put on so tight they caused numbness, pain, bleeding, and compression injuries. The pain caused one rescuer to vomit and several men and women to faint. The police refused to remove the handcuffs from most rescuers for at least 2 hours after they had been securely locked in holding cells inside the jail. Injuries from handcuffs included abrasions, and in some cases, numbness, lasting more than 2 weeks. One young mother of 7 suffered a deep abrasion and nerve contusions so severe that she will require 3 to 6 months of physical therapy to recover. Although her cellmates begged police to remove the handcuffs, they refused. When they were finally removed, she lost consciousness, and police carried her away. Another woman sustained severe nerve contusions on the back of both hands from the handcuffs. She may have permanent damage and require surgery. We urge you to consider whether the brutality these people suffered was necessary. The LAPD maintains that officers who used nunchucks were properly trained in their use. 9 other police departments in Southern California have found it unnecessary to use brutality against rescuers. Some even declined to make arrests. A spokesman for the LAPD stated that the use of nunchucks was an experiment and it was a success. LAPD Commander Ronald Banks said, quote, "We figured this pain compliance tactic would work well and would prevent us from having to drag them to the police buses. We're learning how to deal with these people," end quote. The LAPD has announced that they will continue to use nunchucks against nonviolent rescuers, despite objections that they may cause unnecessary injuries and suffering. This sort of police brutality, and worse, is happening more and more across the United States. If you are a public official, we urge you to take every action necessary to help end these violations of citizens' civil and religious rights by elected officials and police departments. If you are not a public official, we urge you to write or call Attorney General Richard Thornburg at the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. His phone number is 202-633-2000. That's 202-633-2000. And please ask for a Justice Department investigation. Write or call your congressman and ask for a congressional investigation. That phone number to the House of Representatives is 202-225-3121. That's 202-225-3121. Also, please call the White House counsel's office. That's area code 202-456-1414. 202-456-1414. And tell them you want President Bush to defend pro-lifers from these violent abuses. Ask these officials to please put a stop to the violations of the civil and religious rights of these citizens. Every call and every letter is important. Please do your part immediately. Thank you.
Thousands of abortion protesters on both sides of the issue staged their final Easter week siege against the Los Angeles area women's clinics today, braving both the weather and police armed in riot gear. In all, nearly 1,000 were arrested for attempting to block access to the Family Planning Associates Clinic in the Mid-Welshire area of Los Angeles. Warren Wilson reports on today's confrontation.
We're with you, LA Blue. We're with you, LA Blue. We're with you.
The finale was by far the largest and most boisterous in 3 days of demonstrations. Anti-abortionists brought their militant campaign to the city of Los Angeles on an ugly, rainy day and met a force of some 300 police officers standing ready for trouble. During a heavy downpour, officers struggled with Operation Rescue Forces who were forced to their feet when they refused to stand up.
We've asked them to stand up, and when they don't, we've provided a little pain compliance, and most of them have gotten up and walked.
As you can see, many people suffered a lot more than what Chief Gates calls pain compliance. They were, in fact, the victims of police brutality.
My name is Rod Gregory. I'm currently self-employed in sales. From April 1983 until September of 1987, I was a deputy sheriff with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. There was absolutely nothing that I saw on Thursday, Friday, or Saturday that would precipitate or justify the actions that were taken by the LAPD on Saturday morning. A police officer is trained to use force which is necessary, reasonable, and justified by the circumstances. In almost every case that I can think of, it's always designed to elevate the level of officer safety. It's to protect the officer from a suspect who is resisting or a suspect who is violent or even potentially violent, that you have some reason in their background or from their earlier actions to believe that these people might be a threat to your personal safety. And again, that force is supposed to be force which is reasonable and justified by the circumstances, and I would add all of the circumstances. You have to take in the character of people you're dealing with, the number of people you're dealing with, their actions up to the point of arrest. All of that comes into play when you make a decision when to use force and what degree you're going to use it. What I saw was officers lean down and whisper to people, "Are you going to stand up?" Or speak to people and say, "Are you going to stand up?" And if they said no, or if they didn't comply immediately, they were thrown into wrist locks, finger locks, arm locks. They were being picked up when officers literally stuck a couple of fingers up the suspect's nostrils and tried to lift them off the ground with their body weight being supported literally by their nose. Now, if that's being used purely as a technique to get somebody onto their feet, It's very effective, and it may even be justified under certain circumstances. The thing that concerned me is that I saw many people where the mastoid nerve was put under pressure from one or both sides, usually both, or they were using the nose lift, either fingers or just by placing the hand under the nose like that and lifting. But I saw it continued once the person was on their feet, and in many cases I saw it in at least 3 or 4 cases. I was near the front. I got arrested fairly early. But I saw it applied to people who were lying face down on the ground, hands handcuffed behind their back, with one or more officers who had a foot or a knee on the back of their neck, in the middle of their back, setting on them, holding their feet down. You can't stand up when there's an officer with his knee across your neck. And to see somebody with their knee across a person's neck and another officer applying a mastoid hold or a nose lift on them to get them to stand up is ludicrous. And at that point, it's very clear to even somebody without any training that it's being applied in a manner that's designed to punish or give some kind of retribution or teach some kind of lesson. Yeah. And so that part of it concerned me a little bit. In at least one case, I saw them trying to carry a man, one officer on each foot with the legs and feet lifted off the ground, and another officer carrying with a mastoid hold on the head, supporting the entire weight, almost the entire weight of the body because the feet were higher than the head, and carrying him in this fashion under the jawbones and applying this pressure hold, and a person screaming in pain, and there's no way he can stand up with 2 people carrying his feet. So when you start, those tactics are designed as come-alongs. That's what they're called. It's a come-along technique. When somebody doesn't want to walk from point A to point B with you, you give him a little bit of incentive to do that. When you take away that person's ability to comply and continue applying pain, then you're simply adding punishment. And that's what I saw.
Well, I was pulled from a crowd of people and by several officers thrown to the ground forcibly, whereupon 4 to 5 officers proceeded to do quite a number of things. I was given some very painful pressure points in the back of the neck. I had my face quite deliberately ground into the asphalt.
Is this the mark on your cheek I see from that?
That's the healing mark.
You see that on the camera? So why don't you pull in there a little closer, just so we make sure. I saw this, actually I saw this happen to you, I think.
Right. I do have some photographs of that mark as it was a little more originally.
Oh, good. Not with you, though?
Yes, they are right over here. This was taken 4 days later. Actually, it looks considerably better than it had originally. There's also, I believe, police camera photographs that showed up on the evening news showed a much more accurate.
And then also some marks on his hand here, you can see.
The hand is where my hand was forcibly ground into the asphalt by a police officer who
Okay, so they got you out there and they're pushing your face into the cement. What more could they do?
Well, they ground my face in my cheek in for a while, then they straightened up my face and ground my chin into the asphalt for a while, telling me to get up while 4 men were on top of me.
So you couldn't get up?
There was no possible way to get up. And I had one officer that had my ankle, and later on I found out it was strained. The ligaments were strained in it. I also had my thumb sprained. I had my mouth was bloodied. My arm was also strained in the process, and the officer was observed doing several backdrops with his knee on.
Well, you must have been resisting him. You sure you weren't doing more than just going limp?
No, there was absolutely no resistance.
You didn't say anything, or?
No, I said absolutely nothing.
Wednesday, went to a walk-in clinic Wednesday evening, had it x-rayed. They informed me that I had a fracture of the arm bone here at the end where it articulates with the wrist. A piece of it had broken off. They felt it was necessary at least to splint it. They called me the next day and said that the orthopedic people wanted it casted, that it merited being casted. And I'd be in this cast for 6 weeks. and I just hope that I can continue my livelihood as an accountant. It's rather difficult to write.
And it was a policeman that did this to you?
Yeah, it was a policeman.
And you were crying uncle and telling him he didn't need to hurt you, you were willing to go with him?
Right. I'm have a low pain threshold, and as soon as they started applying much pressure at all, I said, I'll comply, I'll do whatever you want, I'll walk.
They told me at the jail ward USC 7th floor that I have a bad sprain. Told me I could take this off, and I did take it off, but I cannot move my thumb at all. I can with a lot of pain. It's very sharp burning. It feels like the breaks that I've had before in another wrist, so yeah, I haven't yet seen a specialist. So I also have nerve damage here. This is and this part of my hand is all numb, where the restraint was across here, and it's like it's all asleep on both sides, and on both sides here. Yeah.
Now, were you roughed up in any way by the police? Tell me what happened.
I was on my knees, knowing that they were arresting people, of course, and in a praying position, and I was grabbed without, no one said to please stand up. And, you know, with my hands, you know, that pain hold that they have, they put my hands up and lifted me by my arms this way, so they bent my arms up, put my hood, the lightweight jacket, which is like a plastic bag, over my head and tightened the top, and then put their hands, put my chin up and put their hands over my mouth and nose, so I was suffocating at the same time that they had that hold. At which time I was muffled, telling them that I will walk, I will walk. What I vividly remember is that I got on the bus. There were, what, 4 steps onto the bus? I did not touch the steps. They turned me around, and a policeman grabbed my arms, handcuffs, and pulled me up. In other words, just pulled me up.
From behind.
And while I was saying, I said at least 4 times, I will walk, and I yelled it at one time because of the pain. When I was on the bus, there was a woman whose handcuffs were on very tight, and she was in tears, and so we were all begging them to loosen them, put new handcuffs on her, please, please, and they completely ignored it. Her hands were purple, and she was in the cell with me when they finally took off the handcuffs. Later I saw her in the cell, and she had cuts on both wrists, almost all the way around them. So she really was in pain. I didn't know if she was exaggerating until I saw her wrist cut up.
They were taking people away, and there was one thing I saw that I certainly didn't like. They dragged this man by the heels, and then when they pulled him off the curb, his head actually got bumped, you know, on the cement, and a blow to the back of the head is a bad thing. It's worse than a forehead blow.
I was dragged by my 2 feet over towards the bus, I guess, without any warning at all. One of the police officers who had my foot twisted it completely around to turn me over on my stomach. I wasn't resisting, it just took me totally off guard, and as a result I suffered a broken bone in my foot.
And have you been to the doctor about this?
Yes, I have.
And he says what?
He says it's a fracture of the tarsal bone, or the medical terms.
And you went limp when they took you, or?
Yes, I did. Yeah, they just basically grabbed me by the feet and dragged me, and then just turned me over real quick by my foot without any warning or anything. I was totally caught off guard and in a lot of pain. I yelled out as they did it because it hurt so bad. He basically turned me over by turning my whole foot around.
Well, the little girl that was sitting next to me, she was about 22, 23. The policeman came over, and she got up with him. She was walking with him. First thing you know, he just took her arm and moved it back behind her back, and she started screaming. And she wasn't doing anything. She was cooperating, and they wouldn't stop. They just kept right on. Then the policeman that came over to me, I think he must have been a Christian, and he said, please, he said, I just don't want to hurt you. He said, please get up and come along with me. And so he helped me up. I have to say that the policeman that arrested me was kind. Then while they were taking me over to the bus, there were about 4 guys laying with their face down. They were putting the handcuffs on them. Instead of having them stand up, they were laying there in the rain with their faces down. Then when I got on the bus, the girl who had her arm bent was crying. There was another girl in the back of the bus crying. Their arms were, you know, they had put the straps on them so tight that they had no circulation. Their arms were turning blue and white. And then they brought another man on. They just threw him on the bus, face down, you know, like this.
A lot of people that were complying, that were willing to walk, they were still twisting their arms and putting the pressure point holds on the heads, pulling them by their nose. I saw priests being dragged. One priest hit his head, or minister, I'm not sure, on the curb. I saw one Mexican fellow that they were pretty much beaten up. They put a knee to his back and really had him down on the ground, scraping pavement.
Did it look like he'd been resisting or anything? Or?
No, he had gone limp.
We're 10 to 15 feet from most all the brutalization.
They kind of dragged them all to a particular spot, and we were right there where they were stepping on their necks and bending their arms behind them. And it was like they had their arms bent up, asking them to get up, but they couldn't because their arms were bent so back.
Yeah. There's many cases I saw where people were, it was obvious they wanted them to walk, but they weren't letting them walk. They drag them off the curb. I saw one man, his arms were being held out, and his feet, nobody's holding his feet, and an officer dropped with all his weight, with his knee, right? I don't know if it hit the chest or stomach, I don't know. And then his feet went up in pain, and then they grabbed his feet, and one was twisting the foot one way, and one was twisting the other way. They were trying to turn him onto his stomach while other ones were trying to keep him on his back. I saw one young lady who they had each hands, one twisting it one way, the other way, and she had dropped to her knees, and then they just pounced on her. She was screaming for him to stop. I saw a man being with a knee in the back, with them holding the nose and ripping his nose back.
We saw the officers as they were taking their turns arresting people, and they were either way in the back of the line joking about it and laughing and explaining to each other, you know, how they twisted each other and patting each other on the back and having a good laugh about it.
So they weren't frustrated and upset?
No.
They were having a good time.
The selected officers that they chose, obviously they had all the same gear on. They had no billy clubs or no guns or anything. And they'd brutalize one, and then they get right back in line. And you'd see them just wiping their hands. You know, this is a lot of fun. And it was, they would laugh. And at one point, they were close enough to me, and this older man, I said, "Take it easy on him." And he just kind of laughed and said, "Just doing my job."
Did the police do this?
Yes, they did.
And what exactly did they do?
Well, they pushed my arms behind my back and kept pushing. I kept yelling, "I'm trained." I was wearing this parka, which, as you can see, has a symbol of first aid trained, first class training. I kept telling them, "I'm trained, you're breaking my arms, you're breaking my arms." They kept pushing, and I felt two distinct snaps. And then I thought that they would show some mercy and carry me over to the other area, but then they did. They carried me by my broken arm and wrist. They drugged me by that broken arm and broken wrist.
So it's broken in two places?
That's correct.
And you've been to the doctor? Obviously you have.
Yes, I have. I've been to their doctors and other doctors.
I went there because I wanted to do my part to save babies' lives and keep the doors closed. But because of what I saw happen to Janet, I just couldn't go limp. And I know she was not too terribly much bigger than I am. And it started out with two of the officers just went at her, and just one on each arm and one on the other, and they just tossed her on the ground and wrenched her arms back. And they didn't pull her arms behind her back. They twisted her wrist this way, and they held her by her wrist. They pulled her body up by her wrist. And at one point, there were one on each wrist, one on each foot. And when they picked her up, her head went forward and kind of pushed her on her face.
Yes, I got the scab on my cheek and under my chin.
And in order to pull her head up, they grabbed her from the back of her neck, which meant with their large hands and her very small neck, their fingers came to the front, and she was bruised for days. And they hauled her off, and she was screaming.
The pain, by the time they got it, my arms all the way back, the pain was so intense, I was just screaming to the Lord, because you were supposed to call on the Lord in our time of need. And so I was screaming, Jesus, Jesus, they're killing the babies. And I began to pass out from the pain or whatever, you know. She said there were 5 officers on me. She saw I weigh 115 pounds. And I began to pass out, and then they just stood me up because I was at the bus at that point. And I was soaking wet, and a lady officer frisked me, and I asked, well, is my key in my pocket, because I had to get home, and she said yes. So they put on the handcuffs real tight, and by the way, I still, you know, have numbness here. I still don't have any feeling here or between these fingers here. And I walked onto the bus. She directed me towards the bus. I got on the bus. I'm kind of like half out of it, just kind of in a daze. And there's another officer, a male officer this time, and he's standing there, and he begins his little personal frisk. And he began feeling the front parts here, and then he turned around and he's squeezing my hiney and getting a little feel here. And I said, I've already been frisked, officer. And he laughed. And then I turned around and I looked at his badge and I said, Officer 6675, or else it was 7765. It was one or the other, but I was just sort of like way out of it. It was on bus number 7. He was not the driver. He was in his riot headgear, whatever that is, that hat he has on. And so he kind of got a little scared that the Lord gave me the presence of mind to look at his badge number, even though I was like really half out of it and, you know, just gone through a lot of pain.
So he was doing a lot more than frisking you.
Yeah, well, he was taking his own, see, because he was in the protection of a bus where people couldn't really see, and the people that were on the bus were in so much pain, they weren't looking up. Every one of us was in pain either from their handcuffs or they were watching the violence outside or something, but yeah.
And the next moment they had him, and he was on his knees, and they were twisting his ears and pushing pressure here, and I watched him turn from red to white to green, and his face was swollen, and he was in so much anguish, and I just started crying and sobbing continually for seconds, and they still did not stop. They continued, and I just could not stop crying, and it just was like ripping my heart out. And personally, and ask, are you going to get up? And repeatedly I saw men say, no, I'm sorry, I cannot. And then they would twist their wrists and then push back like this.
Up a little higher so they can.
Okay, they would twist the wrists. They would twist the wrists real hard and then push here, and then wrap the arms around and lift the arms really high till they were screaming. And then as they stood up, which I suppose was the purpose for that, then they continued to put fingers in their eyes and their nose, to jam their nose, twist their head, their ears.
Right, repeatedly.
It happened after they had stood up. They continued for seconds while they were standing and while they were getting their wrists wrapped with the straps.
So this went beyond just trying to get you to comply.
It wasn't just to comply. It was after they had stood and before they were even trying to take them. And then the police would encircle around them between us and the street to where the cameras were. There would be a half semicircle of police standing behind, and so we were facing the faces and the twisting and the contortions, and we watched them scream and yell, and each one said continually, Lord Jesus, help, forgive them, Lord Jesus, or they would say the rosaries, and they were in excruciating pain.
Before I was arrested, several ladies in front of me were arrested, and they were in some very painful pressure point holds, and their arms twisted, and they were screaming and hollering. The police came. 2 of them came for my arms. They tried to rip them out. My hands were in my Levi jacket. I held on. Then they tried to rip my jacket open. They couldn't. The buttons popped off. They ripped my shirt, and I was still sitting there. Then they got on top of me. They kept pulling my hand out, started twisting my hand with a twister, where I guess several of our people got their wrists broken. One got his knuckles and was driving them deep into my chest right here. And I was starting to feel a lot of pain, so I was getting ready to get up, I believe. Then another cop, I believe it was a third or a fourth one, seemed to me like he lined himself up with my body, and he just jammed his knee into my groin. And that pretty well shocked me. I tried to cover myself, and then he did it again, and then they got me up and took me off.
What is your name?
My name's Ken Cobb.
And what is your occupation?
I'm an investigator for the Orange County Marshal's Office.
And so, well, investigator, what is that? Is that you are a policeman, or you are?
Yes.
Okay. And were you involved in the recent rescue on, what was the date of that? March, what was it? March 25th at 6th and Westmoreland, downtown Los Angeles?
I was there as a spectator and prayer support for the people that were sitting.
From a policeman's point of view, what did it look like to you?
Well, after the arrest started taking place, I was located toward the rear entrance of the building. There were very few that I could tell. News cameras. It seemed I was probably 20 to 30 feet from the buses and vehicles that the people were being dragged to. And just based on my training, I felt that the level of force that the police officers were using on a continual basis for a period of 2 to 3 hours was very excessive.
What about the folks who may be saying they deserved it because they told them not to come here?
Well, a police officer's job is not to punish people. That's for the courts. That's for the judge to determine.
You would say that they were punishing people by what you saw.
Yes.
Did you see anything that you would label it absolute brutality?
Well, from the first point that the officer even began to touch people, they were applying pain tactics. Two officers, one would grab one arm, one would grab the other, twist their arms back and put them in what they call a reverse wrist lock. They were, while the cuffs were being applied very aggressively, many times a third officer, for no apparent reason, would walk up to the person. Because of the extreme height that the arms were being lifted, their heads were forced down, their entire upper bodies were forced forward. Mm-hmm. A third officer would come forward and apply a pressure hold to this nerve right behind the jawbone to both sides of the neck for no apparent reason. The people that I saw this happen to were not struggling. They were in extreme pain because their arms were twisted up very high above their backs. The wrists many times were literally folded over, not laying down against the arm, but beyond the normal extension range. People, when they were lifted to their feet and taken toward the buses, many of them were trying to walk. They were trying to cooperate at that point. But because of the level of pain and the way that the pain was being applied, they couldn't cooperate. There were people that their hands, again, back behind their back while the cuffs are on, with one officer on each arm, their arms were thrust so high up that their heads and their upper body were forced down. Many times their head was below their waist. It's very difficult to walk under those circumstances. Mm-hmm. There were women, including elderly women, that were dragged away, many of them on their tiptoes. And it's pretty hard to justify expecting somebody to cooperate with you and walk to a bus when they can't even get, all of their feet on the ground.
Is this the sort of treatment that is reserved for protesters in a normal situation, or a normal protest?
The training I received in applying pain tactics is for many situations, but one of them is for removing demonstrators. It's not so much the tactics that they used were inappropriate, it's just the degree.
Boy, how do you know when to draw that line? I mean, where do you
well,
pass? Well,
it's obviously, there's subjective decision-making going on there, but the level that was used on a consistent basis, whether people were old, young, men or women, it was obvious to me that a decision was made even before they began making arrests that they were going to be harsh on these people. Mm-hmm. In the back, there were 20 to 30 officers standing there, just waiting in line, more or less. And when it was their turn, 2 to 3 officers would take one person and work on them.
I think the question needs to be asked to to the police department. Why do they continue exerting pressure and pain when the person is walking? And that's what we consistently saw.
Right. The thing that troubled me the most, and I haven't heard anybody talk about this, I stood across, again, about 20 feet from the buses as they were loading them on, especially the men. They were much harsher on the men. Once they got them on the bus, if they had to be totally dragged to the bus, once they got on the bus, there were several very large in stature officers that I would say in the 2 to 3 hours that I watched, 15 to 20 times the officers threw the people into their seats. A couple times they were lifted up off their feet and slammed into the seats so that they were bouncing off the window and the metal partitions between the windows very abruptly. Many of the officers were sitting around in little groups laughing and joking about the person that was worked on. Councilman Michael Wu was standing back there holding his umbrella talking to people, and he acted like he was at a party, you know, laughing and joking, and you know, he was very obviously pleased with what was going on.
You've just heard testimony from 18 witnesses and victims of police brutality inflicted on participants of Operation Rescue by the Los Angeles Police Department. This brutality occurred on Saturday, March 25th, 1989, at the abortion mill on the corner of 6th and Westmoreland near downtown Los Angeles. The following scenes were also recorded on that same day.
Take your mind control somewhere else.